The forest burned with violet flames as Lyra stumbled through the thick undergrowth. Her silver blood left a trail behind her with each step. The elven scout pressed one pale hand against the deep wound in her side. Her pointed ears twitched at every small sound around her. Above the canopy of trees, the roar of her bond companion echoed through the air. Vex, her dragon, was leading the Krell hunters away from where she hid. She had been tracking the alien invasion force for 3 cycles now. She watched as they destroyed colony after colony across the outer rim. The Krell were methodical and brutal, and utterly relentless in their attacks. They had wiped out her entire reconnaissance unit in just a few hours during their ambush. Now Lyra was alone and wounded and dying on a backwater planet that was not even supposed to have sentient life on it. Her mission had failed and her team was gone, and she had no way to call for help. The sound of heavy footsteps crunched through the brush somewhere behind her. Lyra dove behind the trunk of a massive tree. She drew her energy blade with fingers that trembled from blood loss. The weapon flickered weakly in her grip. Her power cells were nearly empty after the long battle. Through the thick smoke that filled the forest, she could see the outline of a Krell warrior approaching. Its 4 arms carried plasma rifles, and its insectoid head scanned the forest floor with precision. A shadow passed overhead and blocked out the sun for a moment. Vex screamed a warning through their mental link that connected their minds. But the warning came too late for her to react. The Krell had found her location at last. The creature raised all 4 of its weapons at once. Its mandibles clicked together in what might have been satisfaction at finding its prey. Lyra closed her violet eyes and thought of her homeworld far away. She thought of the crystal spires of Elantris that she would never see again. She thought of her family and friends who would never know what happened to her. The plasma rifles began to discharge their deadly energy. But the killing blow that should have ended her life never came to pass. When Lyra opened her eyes in confusion, a figure stood between her and the Krell warrior. A human of all things stood there wearing battered military armor. The armor bore no insignia that she recognized from any known faction. The stranger held a combat rifle that looked primitive compared to Krell technology and weapons. But the alien warrior now lay dead at his feet with smoke rising from precise shots to its sensory organs. The human turned around to face her, and Lyra found herself staring into the weathered face of a man. He looked like someone who had been fighting his own war for far too long. His brown eyes assessed her wounds with the practiced efficiency of a combat medic. He spoke to her in perfect galactic standard, which surprised her. His voice was rough and tired when he said, "You look like hell." He asked if she could walk on her own. Before Lyra could form an answer to give him, 3 more Krell burst through the tree line behind them. The human moved with deadly precision that spoke of years of combat training. His armor identification tag read Jake Collins in faded letters. He fired controlled bursts from his rifle as he grabbed her arm. He hauled her to her feet with strength that belied his smaller human frame. He told her they needed to move, and they needed to move right now. There was no time for questions or explanations. Lyra tried to run, but her legs buckled beneath her. Jake caught her before she fell and practically dragged her along. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air where they had been standing just moments before. The Krell were closing in from multiple directions now. Jake pulled something from his belt and threw it behind them as they ran. The device beeped 3 times before exploding in a shower of flames and shrapnel. The pursuing Krell screamed as the explosion caught them off guard. They ran through the burning forest for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Lyra could feel her strength fading with each step. Her vision blurred at the edges and her breathing came in ragged gasps. Only Jake's iron grip on her arm kept her moving forward. Finally, they reached a rocky outcropping on the side of a hill. Jake led her into what looked like a solid rock wall, but was actually a cleverly hidden cave entrance. The opening was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through one at a time. Inside the cave, it was dark and cool and blessedly quiet. Jake helped her sit down against the cave wall before moving back to the entrance. He pulled out a small device and activated it. A shimmering field appeared across the opening that would hide them from Krell sensors. He returned to her side and immediately began examining her wounds. His hands moved with quick efficiency as he pulled out a medical kit from his pack. The kit looked like it had seen heavy use over many months. Lyra tried to speak, but her throat was dry. She managed to gasp out one word, which was Vex. She told him that her dragon was still out there somewhere fighting alone. Jake applied a coagulant gel to the wound in her side as he spoke. He asked if she meant the big reptile that was leading the bugs on a wild chase through the canyons. He told her the dragon was smart and had doubled back to lose them in the canyon maze. He said he had been watching their movements. Lyra stared at him in confusion through the pain. She asked how long he had been on this planet watching them. She asked who he was and why he was here. Jake's jaw tightened as old memories surfaced. He told her 6 months now. His ship called the Frontier Dawn had been shot down during a Krell ambush in orbit. He was the only survivor from a crew of 47 people. He had been running guerrilla operations ever since that day. He was trying to gather intelligence on Krell movements and capabilities. Lyra felt a wave of respect for this strange human savior. She said one human against an entire Krell battalion. She said he was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish to attempt such a thing. Jake admitted he was probably both as he finished bandaging her wound. He handed her a canteen of water which she drank gratefully. Then he said it was her turn to explain. He asked what an elf was doing this far out in the frontier territories. Lyra gathered her strength and began to explain her mission. She told him about the reconnaissance assignment from the Galactic Council. Her unit had discovered that the Krell were building something massive in this sector, something that could devastate entire star systems if completed. The Council had sent her team to investigate and report back. But they had been ambushed before they could send any messages home. Jake stood and walked to a crude map he had drawn on the cave wall with charcoal. The map showed Krell positions and patrol routes he had documented. He said so they were both stranded behind enemy lines. Both of them had intelligence that could save thousands of lives, and neither of them had any way to get that information out to their people. A familiar presence suddenly brushed against the edges of Lyra's mind. She gasped in relief and joy. She told Jake that Vex was close now. Her dragon was coming to find her. Jake asked if the dragon could fly her out of this place to safety. Lyra shook her head sadly. She explained that Vex was wounded too from the initial ambush. That was why he could not carry her far from the crash site earlier. They both needed time to heal their injuries. Time they might not have with the Krell hunting them. Jake studied her face for a long moment before nodding. He said then they would buy themselves that time they needed. He told her he had been planning to hit the Krell supply depot for weeks now. But it was too well guarded for one person to attack alone. With her dragon providing air support and her elvish stealth abilities helping him, they might actually succeed. Lyra could not hide her surprise at his boldness. She said there were hundreds of Krell warriors in this region. An attack would be suicide. Jake's voice hardened with determination as he spoke. He said the Krell thought they were hunting a dying elf and her wounded pet. They did not know about him at all. And they definitely would not expect any kind of counterattack from their prey. Besides, he had taken an oath when he joined the military. An oath to protect humanity and all its allies from any threats. That oath did not stop just because he was stranded on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Lyra met his gaze and saw something familiar there. She saw the same fire that burned in every warrior who refused to surrender. The same determination she had seen in soldiers who kept fighting even when victory seemed impossible. It was a look she knew well because she saw it in her own reflection every single day of this endless war. She told him then they would make the Krell regret ever coming to this world. They would hit them hard and fast and show them that their prey had teeth after all. Jake's shelter was hidden deep within a network of caves that the Krell scanners could not penetrate at all. Something about the mineral composition in the rocks interfered with their advanced sensors and technology. He had laid Lyra down on a makeshift cot that he had built from salvaged materials. He immediately began treating her wounds with supplies from a medical kit that looked like it had seen very heavy use over many months. Lyra gasped suddenly as pain shot through her body. She called out for Vex through their mental connection. She told Jake that her dragon was still out there somewhere. He was still fighting and running from the enemy forces. Jake applied a coagulant gel carefully to the wound in her side. He asked if she meant the big reptile that was leading the bugs on a wild chase through the terrain. He told her the dragon was very smart and had doubled back on his trail. Vex had lost his pursuers in the canyon maze to the east. Jake said he had been watching their movements for hours now. Lyra stared at him with confusion written across her pale features. She asked him how long he had been watching them. She wanted to know how long he had been living on this forsaken planet. Jake's jaw tightened with old pain and memories. He told her 6 months had passed since his arrival. His ship called the Frontier Dawn was shot down during a Krell ambush in high orbit. The battle had been brutal and swift and merciless. He was the only survivor from a crew of 47 good people. He had been running guerrilla operations ever since that terrible day. He was trying to gather intelligence on Krell movements and their plans in this sector. Lyra felt a wave of deep respect for this strange human savior wash over her. She said one human against an entire Krell battalion was remarkable. She told him he was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish to fight alone for so long. Jake admitted with a ghost of a tired smile that he was probably both things at once. He finished bandaging her wound with practiced efficiency. He handed her a canteen of clean water, which she accepted gratefully. He told her it was her turn now. He wanted to know what an elf was doing this far out in the dangerous frontier territories. Lyra took a long drink before she began her explanation. She told him about her reconnaissance mission from the Galactic Council. Her unit of 12 trained scouts had discovered something terrifying in this sector. The Krell were building something massive and dangerous here, something that could devastate entire star systems if they completed their work. The Council had sent her team to investigate the threat and report back with details, but they had been ambushed viciously before they could send any messages back home. Her entire team was wiped out in less than an hour of fighting. Jake stood up slowly and walked over to a crude map on the cave wall. He had drawn it with charcoal over many weeks of careful observation. The map showed Krell positions and patrol routes and supply lines he had documented. He said so they were both stranded behind enemy lines now. Both of them possessed intelligence that could save thousands or even millions of lives, and neither of them had any way to get that critical information out to their respective people. A familiar and comforting presence suddenly brushed against the edges of Lyra's consciousness. She gasped with relief and pure joy flooding through her. She told Jake that Vex was very close now. Her beloved dragon was coming to find her at last. Jake asked her if the dragon was strong enough to fly her out of this dangerous place. He wanted to know if Vex could carry her to safety somewhere far from here. Lyra shook her head with deep sadness. She explained that Vex had been wounded too during their initial ambush days ago. That was the reason he could not carry her far from their crash site when they first arrived. The dragon needed time to heal his injuries just as she did. They both needed rest and medical treatment and food, time they might not have with the Krell forces hunting them so relentlessly. Jake studied her face carefully for a long moment before he finally nodded. He said then they would buy themselves whatever time they needed to heal. He told her he had been planning to attack the Krell supply depot for several weeks now, but the target was far too well guarded for just one person to assault alone. However, with her dragon providing crucial air support from above and with her elvish stealth abilities helping on the ground, they might actually have a real chance at success. Lyra could not hide her surprise at his bold suggestion. She said there were hundreds of Krell warriors stationed in this entire region. A direct attack would surely be suicide for them both. Jake's voice hardened with fierce determination as he spoke his next words. He said the Krell commanders thought they were hunting a dying elf and her wounded pet dragon. The enemy did not know anything about him or his presence here, and they definitely would not expect any kind of counterattack from prey they thought was helpless. Besides that, he had taken a sacred oath when he first joined the Earth military forces many years ago. An oath to protect humanity and all of its allies from any and all threats that arose. That oath did not simply stop or expire just because he was stranded alone on a rock in the middle of nowhere space. Lyra met his intense gaze directly and saw something deeply familiar burning there. She saw the same fire that burned hot in every warrior who absolutely refused to surrender to evil, the same iron determination she had witnessed in soldiers who kept fighting hard, even when victory seemed completely impossible. It was a look she knew extremely well because she saw it reflected in her own eyes every single day of this endless and brutal war. She told him with conviction that they would make the Krell forces regret ever coming to this world. They would show these invaders what happened when they underestimated their prey. The next few hours passed in careful planning and preparation for their mission. Jake showed Lyra his entire collection of salvaged equipment and weapons he had gathered. He had explosives made from Krell power cells that he had stolen. He had remote detonators built from parts of his crashed ship. He had created traps and snares throughout the forest around his hidden base. Lyra was impressed by his resourcefulness and ingenuity. Humans were a young species in the galactic community, but they were clever. They adapted quickly to any situation thrown at them. Jake had turned this entire region into his personal hunting ground over 6 long months. She shared her own knowledge with him as well. She explained how Krell sensor systems worked and their weaknesses. She told him about their command structure and how they communicated. She described their weapons technology and armor vulnerabilities. Together they began to form a real plan of attack. A low rumble echoed through the cave system suddenly. Lyra smiled with pure happiness. She told Jake that Vex had arrived at last. Her dragon had found them. They moved toward the cave entrance carefully. Jake deactivated his cloaking field temporarily. A massive shape landed outside with a thunderous impact that shook the ground. Vex was enormous and magnificent with midnight blue scales that gleamed even in the dim light. His wings were torn in several places from battle damage. Burn marks scarred his thick hide where plasma bolts had struck him, but his golden eyes were alert and intelligent, and filled with fierce protective love when he saw Lyra. The dragon lowered, his great head down to her level. Lyra pressed her forehead against his snout gently. Emotions and thoughts flowed between them through their ancient bond. Relief and joy and determination mixed together. Jake watched this reunion with quiet respect. He had never seen a dragon before coming to this planet. The creatures were rare and dragons only bonded with a chosen few individuals. The connection between Lyra and Vex was something truly special and powerful. Vex turned his massive head to study Jake with those penetrating golden eyes. The dragon seemed to be measuring him and judging his worth. Finally, Vex made a low rumbling sound deep in his chest. It was a sound of acceptance. Lyra translated for Jake. She said Vex approved of him. The dragon sensed that Jake had saved her life. Vex was grateful and willing to fight alongside this brave human warrior. Jake nodded respectfully toward the dragon. He said they would need Vex's help for what came next. He explained his plan to attack the supply depot in detail. Vex would create a diversion from above while Jake and Lyra infiltrated on foot. The dragon would rain fire down on their enemies and draw forces away from critical areas. Lyra added that once they set their charges, Vex would extract them both before the whole facility exploded. The timing would need to be absolutely perfect. One mistake would mean death for all of them. Jake checked his weapons one final time. He looked at his two new allies with grim satisfaction. He said they had been running and hiding and surviving for too long. Now it was time to go on the offensive. Time to show the Krell that this planet belonged to them. Lyra drew her energy blade, which now glowed brightly after recharging. She said they would strike at dawn when the Krell patrols changed shifts. That was when their enemy would be most vulnerable and least prepared. Vex roared his agreement with the plan. The sound echoed through the caves and out into the forest beyond. It was a sound of challenge and defiance and promised vengeance. The unlikely alliance had been formed. An elf and her dragon and a lone human soldier against an entire alien army. The odds were impossible, but none of them cared about that anymore. They had each other now, and they had a purpose. The Krell supply depot sat in a large clearing 2 kilometers from the main hive structure. It was a sprawling complex of alien architecture that pulsed with sickly green bioluminescence in the darkness. Jake and Lyra observed it carefully from a high ridge above. Vex was coiled silently behind them in the shadows. His midnight blue scales helped him blend perfectly into the darkness around them. Jake whispered quietly as he looked through his rifle scope. He counted 3 guard towers positioned around the perimeter. There were automated defenses covering the entire perimeter fence. At least 20 warriors were on active patrol around the facility. The fuel cells they needed to destroy were stored in those tall cylindrical structures near the center. If they could overload those cells, the resulting chain reaction would take out half of the Krell logistics in this entire region. Lyra's enhanced vision picked out many small details that Jake's human eyes simply missed. She pointed to specific gaps in their coverage pattern. She told him there was a major weakness in their sensor grid at 2 key locations. She said that Vex and she could slip through those blind spots undetected. They could plant his explosive charges and be out before the Krell even knew they were there. Jake asked her what would happen when the enemy finally realized what they were doing. When the Krell understood they were under attack, Lyra smiled with a predatory expression that reminded Jake of a hunting cat. For all her ethereal beauty and grace, she was a trained warrior. She had survived countless brutal battles across many worlds. She told him that moment was when he would provide the perfect distraction for them. The plan they created was audacious and required split-second timing from everyone. Jake would launch a feint attack from the western ridge above the depot. This would draw the majority of the Krell forces away from the main facility. Lyra and Vex would infiltrate during all the chaos and confusion. They would set the charges throughout the fuel depot. Then they would extract quickly before the entire facility went up in flames. As the twin moons rose high overhead, they all moved into their assigned positions. Each of them knew their role perfectly. There was no room for error or hesitation tonight. Jake's opening attack was a masterpiece of calculated fury and misdirection. He had rigged remote charges throughout the entire western approach over the past week. When he detonated them in a carefully timed sequence, it looked exactly like a full-scale military assault. Krell warriors swarmed toward the explosions immediately. Their plasma rifles lit up the night sky with deadly green fire. Lyra and Vex moved like ghosts through all the confusion below. Her elvish grace and training allowed her to slip past sensors easily, sensors that would have immediately detected a human or any other species. Meanwhile, Vex's natural camouflage abilities rendered him nearly invisible in the deep darkness. They reached the fuel depot within just a few minutes of starting. Lyra began placing the explosive charges Jake had carefully prepared for this mission. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she attached each one. She set the timers exactly as they had planned together. But suddenly Vex's warning roar shattered the relative quiet of the night. The dragon's voice echoed across the entire valley. A massive Krell commander emerged slowly from the main structure ahead. This creature was twice the size of the normal warriors they had fought. Its 6 glowing eyes fixed directly on Lyra's position. The commander's 4 arms raised huge plasma cannons that could vaporize a tank. Lyra shouted desperately for Vex to go and save himself. She shoved the dragon hard toward the sky above. Vex hesitated because he was deeply unwilling to abandon his bond partner to death. But Lyra's mental command through their link was absolutely powerful. Vex launched skyward with a roar of anguish and rage as the commander opened fire below. Lyra dodged and weaved between the deadly plasma bolts. Her enhanced reflexes were barely enough to keep her ahead of the incoming fire. She managed to activate the final charges she had placed, but the massive commander was closing in fast on her position. Her energy blade was still weak from earlier battles. Her wounds from days ago were slowing her movements down. Then Jake's urgent voice crackled over the comm unit he had given her. He shouted for her to drop down immediately and hit the ground. Lyra threw herself flat against the hard earth without hesitation. Jake's precision rifle fire stitched across the clearing in controlled bursts. The Krell commander staggered backward as rounds hit it. Its thick armor began cracking under the sustained and focused assault. Lyra used this precious opening to complete her mission. She set the final charge and sprinted hard for the extraction point. Jake's voice came through again with extreme urgency. He told her 30 seconds until detonation. He shouted for her to move faster and not stop running. Vex swooped down from above like a falling star. The dragon grabbed Lyra carefully in his massive claws. He carried her skyward just as the depot erupted in a truly massive fireball below them. The explosion created a chain reaction through the Krell facility. Secondary detonations ripped through their entire infrastructure like dominoes falling. From their safe vantage point back on the ridge, Jake watched the destruction with grim satisfaction. Beside him, Lyra and Vex landed heavily on the stone. Both of them were breathing hard, but they were alive and safe. Lyra told him between gasps that it was not bad for a human soldier. She gave him a genuine smile of respect and admiration. Jake reloaded his rifle with practiced motions. He replied that it was not bad at all for an elf and her dragon either. But their brief celebration was cut very short by what they saw next. In the far distance, the main hive structure pulsed with angry red light. The glow grew brighter and more intense with each passing second. The Krell were mobilizing their full military force now. Every warrior in the region would be hunting them soon. Jake said quietly that they had really made the enemy angry this time. The real war between them was just beginning now. This attack was only the opening move. Lyra stood up slowly despite her exhaustion. She told him they had proven something important tonight. They had shown that the Krell could be hurt, that they could bleed and their facilities could burn. The enemy was not invincible after all. Vex growled low in agreement with her words. The dragon's golden eyes watched the distant hive with intense focus. He was ready for whatever came next. Jake began gathering his equipment quickly. He said they needed to relocate immediately to a new position. The Krell would track them to this ridge soon. They had to stay mobile and unpredictable now. He knew at least 3 other cave systems they could use as temporary bases. As they prepared to move out, Explosions continued to rock the supply depot below. Fires burned bright orange and green where alien chemicals mixed and reacted. Black smoke rose high into the night sky like a beacon. Lyra watched the destruction they had caused together. She felt a spark of hope kindle in her chest for the first time in days. Maybe they really could survive this nightmare. Maybe they could actually win against impossible odds. Jake led them down the backside of the ridge using a hidden trail. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew this terrain perfectly. Every rock and tree and cave was mapped in his mind after 6 long months. They traveled through the darkness for over an hour before Jake finally stopped. He had brought them to another cave system even better hidden than his first base. This one had multiple escape routes and better defensive positions. Inside, they finally allowed themselves to rest. Lyra tended to Vex's wounds while Jake set up his sensor equipment. The dragon's wing membrane was torn but would heal with time. The burns on his scales were superficial and would fade. Jake told them both that they made a good team together tonight. Better than he had hoped for, honestly. If they kept hitting the Krell like this, they might actually disrupt their operations enough to matter. Lyra asked him what he thought the enemy was building in their main hive. What could be so important that they deployed an entire battalion to guard it here? Jake's expression became serious and troubled. He said he did not know yet, but they needed to find out soon. Whatever the Krell were constructing, it had to be destroyed before completion. The fate of many worlds might depend on them stopping it. Vex rumbled softly and laid his great head down to rest. The dragon was exhausted from the battle and flight, but his eyes remained alert and watchful even as he rested. Lyra sat down beside her dragon companion. She told Jake that tomorrow they would scout closer to the main hive. They would find out what secret the Krell were hiding there, and then they would figure out how to destroy it completely. Jake nodded his agreement. He checked his weapons one more time before allowing himself to rest. He said that together the 3 of them would find a way. They had already achieved the impossible once tonight. They could do it again when needed. Outside the cave, the night slowly gave way to dawn. The fire still burned in the distance where the supply depot had stood. It was a reminder of what they had accomplished, and a promise of what was still to come. For 3 long days, Jake and Lyra and Vex waged a shadow war against the Krell forces. They hit supply lines moving through the forest. They ambushed isolated patrols far from reinforcements. They destroyed communication arrays that connected enemy units. They were always staying one step ahead of the alien hunters pursuing them. But Jake knew deep down they were running out of time fast. The Krell were bringing in fresh reinforcements from orbit. Soon this entire planet would be crawling with thousands of warriors searching for them. Lyra spoke up during their 4th night hiding in the cave system. She said they needed to find out what the Krell were building in their main hive. Her wounds had healed remarkably fast thanks to elvish physiology and Jake's medical supplies. She told him that if they could get solid intelligence back to the Galactic Council, this whole nightmare would be worth all their suffering. Jake had been thinking exactly the same thing for days now. He told her the main hive was far too well defended for any kind of frontal assault. But he had noticed an interesting pattern in their patrol schedules over weeks of observation. There was a 10-minute window every evening when the eastern approach became vulnerable. The guard change created a brief gap in their coverage. Lyra said quietly that 10 minutes was not very much time at all for what they needed to do. Jake agreed, but said it would be enough if they were fast and precise. He pulled out his detailed map, which had grown considerably more complete over the past days. He explained that Vex would create a massive diversion at the northern section. Meanwhile, they would slip inside through the ventilation system on the east side. They would grab whatever data they could access quickly. Then they would extract before the Krell locked down the entire facility. Lyra studied the plan carefully with her violet eyes, thoughtful and serious. She told Jake he realized this was likely a one-way mission for them. Even if they succeeded in getting inside, getting back out alive would be nearly impossible with thousands of enemies. Jake spoke quietly as old memories surfaced in his mind. He said he had been living on borrowed time since the Frontier Dawn went down in flames, but that weapon the Krell were building could not be allowed to go operational. If it was as dangerous as she believed, they simply could not let it be completed. Too many innocent people were counting on them to succeed, even if those people did not know they existed or were fighting for them. The elf reached out slowly and clasped his shoulder firmly. It was a gesture of deep respect among her people. She told him he fought with true honor and courage. She said his ancestors would be extremely proud of everything he had done here. That evening, they put their desperate plan into motion as the suns began to set. Vex unleashed a massive torrent of dragon fire on the northern section of the hive. His roars echoed across the entire valley like thunder. Krell warriors swarmed immediately to intercept the dragon threat. They left the eastern approach temporarily exposed just as Jake had predicted. Jake and Lyra moved through the shadows like specters of death itself. They slipped quietly through corroded ventilation grates in the outer wall. They crawled carefully through narrow passages that reeked of alien biochemistry and decay. The deeper they went into the hive, the more the temperature rose steadily. Soon Jake's armor systems were struggling hard to keep him cool enough. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a truly massive chamber at the very core of the hive structure. What they found there made both of them freeze completely in absolute horror. The weapon the Krell had been building was not a device or machine at all. It was something biological and alive. The enemy had been breeding a massive creature here, something ancient and terrible that pulsed with raw energy. The energy registered off every scanner Jake carried. The creature's enormous form was barely contained by the structure built around it. Neural interfaces and cables connected it to a sophisticated control system throughout the chamber. Lyra whispered with her face completely pale. She said it was a living planet killer from the old legends. The ancient stories spoke of such terrible things, but she had never truly believed they were real. Jake was already working fast to download data from the nearest terminal. His combat computer was hacking through layers of Krell encryption. He told her urgently they needed to destroy this thing before the enemy could deploy it anywhere. If this creature got loose in space, entire worlds would die. A piercing alarm suddenly shrieked through the massive chamber. They had been detected by security systems. Their presence was now known. Krell warriors poured into the chamber from every single entrance and corridor. There were dozens of them and more coming every second. Jake and Lyra immediately fought back-to-back against the swarm. His rifle barked controlled bursts while her energy blade cut down enemies. They moved together with brutal efficiency born from days of fighting side by side. But they were badly outnumbered and completely trapped in the chamber. Lyra's mental call was desperate and urgent. She screamed for Vex through their bond. She told her dragon they needed extraction immediately or they would die here. The dragon's response came instantly through their connection. The entire hive structure shook violently as Vex slammed into it from high above. His massive claws tore through alien architecture like it was paper. He crashed down into the chamber in a shower of debris and twisted metal. His jaws closed carefully around both Jake and Lyra in one swift motion. They flew upward through a hailstorm of plasma fire from all directions. Vex's armored scales deflected most of the shots successfully, but one bolt found its mark and burned deep through the dragon's wing membrane. Vex roared in terrible pain but kept flying hard. He carried them away from the hive as it mobilized behind them with fury. Every warrior was now pursuing them across the landscape. They crash-landed roughly in the forest 3 kilometers away from the hive. All 3 of them were wounded and completely exhausted from the battle. Jake checked his combat computer quickly with shaking hands. The data transfer had completed successfully during their escape. They had everything they needed about the weapon and the Krell plans, but now they faced an impossible question that had no good answer. How could 3 battered warriors possibly stop a weapon that could destroy entire worlds? A living creature of mass destruction that the Krell had spent months breeding and preparing. Jake studied the data scrolling across his screen in the dim light. The information was terrifying in its implications. The creature was nearly ready for deployment. Within days, the Krell would be able to unleash it on populated systems. Lyra tended to Vex's burned wing as gently as she could. The dragon whimpered softly in pain. She told Jake through tears that they had to find a way to stop this nightmare. All those innocent people could not be allowed to die. Jake continued reading through the stolen files with growing understanding. He found something buried deep in the technical specifications. The neural interface that controlled the creature worked in both directions. If someone could establish a direct connection to it, they might be able to overload its systems. The feedback would cause a catastrophic failure in the creature's biology. But Jake's voice was heavy with the weight of what he had discovered. He told them the process would require a sacrifice from someone. Whoever made that direct neural connection would not survive the massive feedback. The energy discharge would kill them instantly. Lyra and Vex exchanged a long look that needed no words between them. She told Jake firmly that they would do it together. She said Vex and she shared a bond that transcended normal species limitations. Together, their combined mental strength might be enough to force the overload. Jake's voice was firm and absolutely final when he refused. He told her no in a tone that allowed no argument. He explained that she was the only one who could get their data back to the Galactic Council safely. Humanity desperately needed her to warn them what was coming. He said he was already dead and had been since his ship crashed. He had been living on borrowed time for 6 months. Now he could do something that truly mattered with his death. They argued intensely through the night about who would make the sacrifice. But Jake had already made his final decision. Nothing would change his mind now. As dawn began to approach slowly, Jake started preparing for what would be his last mission ever. He checked his weapons one final time. He reviewed the data about the neural interface repeatedly. He made sure he understood exactly what needed to be done. He turned to Lyra with serious eyes and asked her to promise him something important. He said she must not let humanity forget what happened on this planet. They had fought together here as equals, human and elf and dragon standing united against darkness. That had to mean something important. That truth had to matter to future generations. Lyra's eyes glistened with tears she absolutely refused to let fall. She promised him solemnly that his name would be remembered forever. In every hall where warriors gathered across the galaxy, they would speak of Jake Collins, the human who stood alone against impossible darkness and never surrendered. Vex lowered his great head slowly and touched his snout gently to Jake's forehead. It was a gesture of ultimate respect among dragons. Through their temporary bond, Jake felt the dragon's powerful emotions. Gratitude. The answer to their impossible problem came from the stolen data Jake had downloaded. As he reviewed the files through the long night, he discovered something critical the Krell had overlooked completely. The creature's neural interface system worked in both directions like a two-way communication channel. If someone could establish a direct connection to it, they could potentially overload its entire biological system. The massive feedback would cause catastrophic failure throughout the creature's body. Jake's voice was heavy with the terrible knowledge when he explained this. He told them that whoever made that connection would not survive the feedback at all. The person would die instantly from the enormous energy discharge. Lyra and Vex exchanged a meaningful look between them that needed absolutely no words. The elf spoke simply and said they would do it together as one. She explained that Vex and she shared a bond that went beyond normal species connection. Together, their combined mental strength might be powerful enough to force the overload and survive. Jake's response was firm and absolutely final. He refused their offer completely. He told Lyra she was the only one who could get their critical data back to the Galactic Council safely. Humanity desperately needed her to warn them about what was coming next. He said he was already a dead man walking. He had been ever since the Frontier Dawn crashed 6 months ago. Now he could finally do something that truly mattered with the time he had left. They argued fiercely through the entire night about who would make this ultimate sacrifice. But Jake had made his final decision and nothing could change his mind now. He was going to save them both even if it cost him everything. As dawn began approaching slowly across the horizon, Jake started preparing for what would be his very last mission. He checked each of his weapons one final time with care. He reviewed the technical data about the neural interface over and over. He made absolutely certain he understood exactly what needed to be done to succeed. He turned to face Lyra with serious brown eyes. He asked her to promise him something very important before he left. He said she must never let humanity forget what happened on this forgotten planet. They had fought together here as true equals and allies. Human and elf and dragon standing united against terrible darkness. That truth had to mean something profound. That bond had to matter to all future generations who came after them. Lyra's violet eyes glistened with tears she absolutely refused to let fall down her face. She promised him solemnly that his name would be remembered forever across every world. In every hall where warriors gathered throughout the galaxy, they would speak of Jake Collins with respect. The brave human soldier who stood completely alone against impossible darkness. The man who never surrendered even when death was certain. Vex lowered his massive head down slowly. He touched his snout gently against Jake's forehead in the way dragons showed ultimate respect. Through their temporary bond connection, Jake felt the dragon's powerful emotions flowing freely. Gratitude and deep sorrow and fierce admiration washed over him like waves. The dragon was saying goodbye in his own way. The final assault began exactly at dawn as planned. Lyra and Vex led a desperate diversionary attack on the hive's western defenses with everything they had. They drew every single available Krell warrior away from the central core chamber. The dragon unleashed torrents of fire while Lyra struck from the shadows. Together they created absolute chaos throughout the enemy ranks. Jake used all the confusion to infiltrate one final time alone. His movements were fueled by pure determination now. He knew this was his last stand on Earth or any world. He moved through the passages he had memorized from their previous infiltration. Every step brought him closer to his destination and his death. He finally reached the massive chamber at the hive's heart, as Krell warriors realized his true target. Dozens of enemies poured in behind him from every corridor and entrance. But Jake had already reached the neural interface terminal at last. He jammed the connection nodes directly into his combat armor's main systems without hesitation. This created a brutal bridge between human technology and the alien creature's biology. The feedback hit him instantly like lightning striking his brain. Jake screamed in pure agony as completely foreign thoughts flooded his human mind. Monstrous instincts and alien hunger tried to overwhelm his consciousness entirely, but he held on desperately to his sense of self. He forced his iron will against the creature's primitive mind. He channeled every single ounce of human stubbornness and rage into the overload sequence. The massive creature thrashed violently in its containment. Its death throes tore the entire hive structure apart from deep within. Support beams collapsed and walls crumbled as the building lost integrity. Krell warriors scattered in complete panic as their precious weapon and their base began collapsing around them. Outside the hive, Lyra suddenly felt Jake's presence starting to fade through the comm link they shared. She whispered no desperately. She said no over and over like a prayer that could somehow change reality. But Vex's urgent roar brought her back to the present moment. The massive hive was imploding on itself rapidly. The chain reaction was spreading through every section. They had to leave immediately or be caught in the total destruction. As they flew away to safety, Lyra looked back one final time with tears streaming down her face. The explosion lit up the entire sky like a second sun being born. A massive fireball consumed the hive completely. It consumed the terrible weapon inside, and it consumed the brave human who had sacrificed everything to stop it from killing billions. Lyra screamed Jake's name into the wind, but only silence answered her back. He was gone forever now. The price of victory had been paid in full. 3 long weeks passed before Lyra finally stood before the full Galactic Council assembly. Her injuries had healed, but her heart still ached. She delivered her complete report about everything that had happened. The data Jake had died to obtain revealed the full scope of the Krell threat to everyone. It gave the Allied forces exactly the intelligence they desperately needed. Now they could mount a proper counter-offensive against the enemy. Counselor Mira asked about the human soldier in her report. She wanted to know if he had truly acted completely alone against an entire battalion. Lyra's voice was steady despite the grief that still filled her completely. She told them Jake fought with more honor than most warriors showed in a lifetime. He had saved her life when she was dying. He helped her complete her critical mission successfully. And he gave his own life freely to stop a weapon that would have killed billions of innocent people across many worlds. She said humanity might be young in the galactic community compared to others, but Jake Collins had proven beyond any doubt they were worthy of standing beside the elder races as equals. The council voted unanimously to honor Jake's incredible sacrifice. A beautiful memorial was erected on his homeworld of Earth for all to see. Though his body was never recovered from the ruins of the hive, his name would live forever. But Lyra knew a deeper truth in her heart. Late at night, when she closed her tired eyes, she could still feel Jake's presence somehow. Not as a ghost haunting her, but as a powerful reminder of what mattered most. A reminder that true courage was not about being the strongest or most advanced. It was about standing up when everything seemed completely hopeless. It was about protecting those who could not protect themselves from harm. As Lyra returned to her duties serving the council, she carried Jake's combat knife with her always. It was a gift he had given her on that last night together. Wherever she went across the galaxy, whatever battles she had to fight, she kept her solemn promise to him faithfully. She told his story again and again to anyone who would listen. In every hall and on every world she visited, she spoke of the human who saved an elf and her dragon from certain death. the man who saved the entire galaxy itself through his sacrifice. Some people called it just a legend or myth, but Lyra always knew far better than them. It was not a legend at all. It was a testament to what became possible when different species chose to stand together, when different worlds and different souls united against the darkness, when strangers became brothers and sisters in arms. And that truth she knew deep in her soul was the most human thing of all. The refusal to give up, the determination to fight for others, the willingness to sacrifice everything for what was right. Jake Collins had embodied all of those qualities perfectly. He had shown the galaxy what humanity truly meant at its core, and his legacy would inspire countless others for generations to come. Lyra looked up at the stars above her as she stood on a balcony. She whispered a quiet thank you to her fallen friend. Wherever his spirit had gone, she hoped he knew his sacrifice had mattered. He had changed everything. He had saved countless lives, and he had proven that one person could make all the difference when they refused to surrender. Vex rumbled softly beside her in agreement. The dragon missed their human friend too. Together they would carry his memory forward into whatever battles came next. Together they would honor everything he had fought and died for. The war against the Krell continued across many fronts. But now the Allied forces had hope and knowledge. They had the intelligence Jake had given his life to obtain, and they had proof that even the darkest evil could be